All right, so how many of you believe in free will? What the hell's the matter with you? Why are you here?
Free will.
Free will.
Oh, okay, so we'll fix that. Okay, so where does all this material come out of? So I'm real proud of the fact that I created only the second law in neuroscience class in the nation. First one was at Brooklyn Law School. Now they're everywhere. You can't pursue a degree in the legal profession without coming across this data, okay? And it's kind of blowing up the legal profession based on what we just read to you. The whole premise of the law is you know right from wrong. You do something bad, you should be punished, right? You made a choice, right? Now the data that I'm going to present to you suggests that might not be so true. And so if it isn't, then the criminal law is in trouble. Because that's the central premise of the criminal law. So we'll look at how this impacts the criminal law a little bit, but mostly you're here because if you pay attention, and I have a few students here, so I know not everyone will pay attention. Ooh, I got a shot at some of my students. If you pay attention, then you should walk out of here realizing that this goes way beyond affecting the law. This has a direct impact on how you live your life, and how you think about yourself as a human being. How do you like that? All right, so you're not going to get any answers here. So if you came for answers, answers aren't important in an educational setting anyway. It's the questions that are important. So I won't give you answers because we haven't figured this out. But what we have figured out is that things are not what they seem. The way you live your life and the way you function doesn't have any data for it. Curiosity should result, mumbling should ensue. So when I give, I do a similar, come on in, hi. So when I do a similar presentation in my neuroscience.
I didn't know if I had freely chosen to do
Well, it's clear that you just freely chose to interrupt. It was caught on camera, Ruth. Ruth teaches our video gaming program. She is awesome. See how I got that plug in there? Yeah, but video games aren't important. I wouldn't even take that class. Oh, okay, sorry. I'll take that back. So, as I just mentioned, the whole criminal law is premised on this notion that you choose your behavior. Your whole life is based on this notion that you choose your behavior. Is that true, right? In other words, how about the legal definition of truth? Beyond a reasonable doubt. It's probably the best definition we have, even in scientific terms. So do we think we have free will beyond a reasonable doubt? Let's see. All right, so I'm not going to have a lot of legal stuff here. We'll get off into the more crazy stuff pretty quick. But mens rea is the concept in the law that you have to have a guilty mind. You have to have chosen your behavior. You have to have intent in order to be held responsible, okay? So in the law, in the criminal law at least, act is not enough. You must intend your actions. Now, a classic example is drunk driving. Obviously, when you're drunk, you don't choose to hit somebody in the crosswalk. But there, the law implies that you intended to drink too much. Yeah. So, intent is implied to the prior behavior of getting drunk. But an act's not enough. Now, law's been around a long time, thousands of years. We go back to the Sumerians and the Babylonians for the earliest legal statements. And all of those assume free will. All of those assume that your acts are based on your own intent, and therefore the government, the state, the king, whatever, is justified in punishing you. But that notion has never been adopted by a single court, not by a single legislature, not even by a single king. It's been assumed for thousands of years. And it's assumption that might blow up the criminal law. All right, so let's talk about a little brain stuff. Prefrontal cortex, this part right behind your eyes, is the part of your brain that really makes you human. It's the last part of the brain to develop, and it's the center of things like reasoning, future orientation, planning, mitigating your reactions, controlling your anger. All that takes place in the prefrontal cortex. So that's where the action is.
So is that where a lobotomy attacks, when you have a lobotomy, is the Is it cortex?
I've not had a lobotomy, so I don't know.
Really?
Well, yeah,
Are you sure?
could be some scars back there, right? I don't, does anybody here know what part of the brain a lobotomy affects?
It would all depend upon what they're trying to treat.
And so it would be different regions. Okay. So we have smart people here. You know, and so, but that's maybe a mistake to be smart and come to this presentation, right? Could be a problem. Now, brain scans. You've probably heard about this in the popular press, seen them in all sorts of places, magazines. I mean, this is showing up a lot. So this data is kind of getting out into the popular culture. But there's two types of brain scans. One that will look at your brain physically. So we'll look at size, shape, size of certain regions. And then there are brain scans that look at functional activity of the brain, okay? And there we're looking at either electrical activity, metabolism, and there's software that's been set up to interpret the data from a functional MRI to then place it on a screen. And you've probably seen screens that look like that, right? Again, this is out in the popular press now. So what these different regions are showing is different levels of activity. Sometimes it can be electrical. Usually with a scan like this, it's going to be metabolism or literally functioning, you know, in that area. And then the colors are going to denote greater activity than another. So the red would be the strongest areas. So that's an fMRI machine. So that's, hopefully none of you have had to go through this. It's not pleasant. You have, yeah. I knowing you, I think it probably makes sense that you've had a brain scan already. Oh, that's being recorded. That was a cheap shot. Yes. But look at that monster, right? And so what that's doing is that's measuring the function of your brain in real time. So in other words, someone watching the computer screen is seeing what's happening in your brain right now. So let's start with the first experiment that blew all this up. Actually, let me take you back. I don't have this on the screen, but it might not be a bad setup. Back in the 1980s, Benjamin Lebet at San Francisco State first wanted to determine how long it took for you to think to move your hand, and then how long it took for that hand to move, right? Seems simple, right? I mean, that's kind of interesting. So I think it, and then my hand moves. How much time does it take? And so he found that your brain decides before you do by about 300/10 of a second. Now this is back in the 80s. You do not have functional MRIs yet. You don't have the sophisticated brain scans that we have now yet. And so obviously that data was very controversial and people were arguing both sides of it and that sort of thing. Well, then we got some very sophisticated brain scans and some folks wanted to do the very same test to find out how long it takes between your making the decision to move your hand and the movement of your hand, and they use very sophisticated machines. And so you're in that fMRI machine, you're laying down, they're watching your brain activity in real time, you have a clicker in each hand, think of Jeopardy or something, and then at your leisure you choose right or left. Oh, right. Oh, right again. Left. Right or left, your choice. Boom. 7 to 10 seconds before you decide, your brain's already decided for you. So let's say that again. 7 to 10 seconds before you decide, your brain's already decided for you. Now, most of you came in here with the silly notion that you're in control of your brain, that you're in control of your thoughts, right? How can this be? Prior brain activity predicts the hand you seem to choose. Now, this is peer-reviewed, published data out of the Max Planck Institute, one of the leading scientific laboratories in the world. And so I believe this is 2008, yes. And so this blew up the legal world. It's like, oh my goodness. So what does it mean that your brain chose first? So you're lying there at your leisure, someone's watching on the screen, the computer screen, and activity in a certain part of your brain is where the decision to move your left hand will show, and a different part of your brain is where activity will arise if you've chosen your right hand. And so 7 to 10 seconds before you go, oh, right, your brain's already decided you're going to choose right. Notice the name of this research, unconscious determinants of free decisions. Unconscious determinant. Because you're not aware of any of this. Anybody in here know where their brain is lit up right now? Howard, you're pretty smart. You know what part of your brain you're using right now? No one does, right? We have no awareness of the different things occurring in our brain. What regions we drop into, what activity is occurring, etc. And so this unconscious determinants means that your brain's deciding before you do, and then it's tricking you. There's a time lapse, a projection, and it's tricking you into thinking you decided. I mean, I actually decided to do this today. By the way, I have a bit of a little bug here. That's why my throat's craggly. But I care enough that I came anyway here for you. So here's a quote from the study. I don't like to read PowerPoints, we'll read this one. We found the outcome of the decision can be encoded in brain activity of prefrontal and parietal cortex, that part of the brain that makes you human, up to 10 seconds before it enters awareness. This delay presumably reflects the operation of a network of high-level control areas that begin to prepare an upcoming decision long before it enters awareness. Your brain decided which hand to move, ladies and gentlemen, long before you did. And you complied. You picked the same hand your brain did. Please.
Did it come from a part of your brain that governs your feelings, emotions?
Could be, right? We don't really know. We really don't know what's happening here. What we know, though, is that you don't make decisions the way we thought before this research came out. That's what we know for sure. In other words, that's the takeaway of this whole talk. Things are not what they seem. That's your takeaway. So we don't know what's going on here. But what we know is that you don't decide the way you think you do. Now, a lot of people argued, well, this is movement, right? So there's some reflex going on. And so maybe your brain's just preparing for movement and there's some unconscious reflex activity with movement. Okay. So then these same folks tested an abstract decision. And here, your choice was to solve an equation either using subtraction or addition. You could get to the same answer, but you got to choose the pathway. Okay? And there they found there was a 4-second delay, that your brain chose an abstract way of thinking 4 seconds before you did. So that seems to blow up the argument that this is just a reflexive action from motion, from movement. It gets worse. This just came out, I think just a few months ago. So then they wanted to test visualization. So you're shown two pictures. Okay, and then you are asked to visualize whichever one you want. And there they found that your brain decided what visualization to do 11 seconds before you decided. Now, ladies and gentlemen, 10, 11 seconds, that's a long time. We're talking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? This is a long time for your brain to be doing stuff you're not even aware of.
What if during this test the person chooses an image sooner than the 11 seconds would have passed from the first time by seeing them, that it would have registered in the brain?
Well, no, you look at the two situations, and then you're told to calmly then choose which one to visualize, and that's when you begin to visualize it. And what they found is you made the choice, because a part of the brain would light up if you chose that image, and a different part of your brain would light up with this image. And so 11 seconds before you began the visualization process, before you chose, your brain has already chosen for you. Please.
Did they find anything such as subjects who had artistic skills could accomplish this quicker?
This was pretty much normal people, although that's questionable because usually these studies are done on college students. You know. Oh, okay, sorry. I wish we could have got that face on camera. That was a good one.
I can see the context where an artist would more quickly see what they want an image to be.
But that's not what's happening, right? In other words, they're not being asked to construct an image. They're being asked to choose an image. So the artistic ability shouldn't matter here. But I don't know. I'm not aware that anybody's, nailed it down that far. This is all cutting edge crazy stuff right now.
So how do they differentiate it? Because we know trauma changes how the brain processes stuff.
So they're choosing presumably normal people. That would mean that you probably wouldn't have been invited in, right? No, I mean, we agree on this stuff. But, so presumably, I mean, obviously they're not screening people to have perfect brains because there really is no such thing. But they're doing a large enough sample that they're trying to arrive at some data here. And what we know is, we don't know. Now note that this was published in Nature magazine. We have any scientists in here? So that's the gold standard. You get published in Nature magazine, you're likely going to be getting a Nobel Prize. That's the big boys. So I love this quote. Jerry Coyne is a neuroscientist. And so again, I'm going to read this to you. I don't like to read these things, but this is a fascinating quote. To eliminate the confusion produced by multiple and contradictory concepts of free will, I propose that we reject the term entirely and adopt the suggestion of the cognitive scientist Marvin Minsky. Instead of saying my decision arises from free will, we might say, quote, my decision was determined by internal forces I don't understand. What's that?
Sounds psycho.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Right? And but unfortunately, that's you and me.
Yeah.
Right? Well, at least you. I mean, now, Joshua, I know this is a little hard to see in the back, but Joshua Green and Jonathan Cohen are two neuroscientists from Harvard, really heavy hitters in this area. And so the next shot, oh, actually, this was before that other data. This was 2004, but this is another article that started to blow up the legal system. And so again, this is a quote worth reading. We can recognize that free will is conceptualized by the folk psychology system. So that's the assumption. The folk psychology system is the assumption that we have free will. It's the premise that the law is based on. I punish you because you chose to be bad. It's an illusion. These are neuroscientists from Harvard, ladies and gentlemen. It's an illusion, free will. And we should structure our society accordingly by rejecting retributive legal principles. In other words, we need to get rid of punishment. We need to quit punishing people for things they may or may not have done, or intended, rather. Okay? Now, it doesn't mean we don't take them off the street, but it means we don't beat you, kill you, starve you, put you in solitary confinement, etc. Because it's like beating the dog. We talked about mens rea a moment ago, right? Central concept of the law, something more than an act is needed. You must intend your conduct. Free will, intention, agency, whatever word you want to use, none of those have any scientific evidence. In fact, it goes the opposite way. There's a lot of evidence that contradicts the everyday sense of reality that we all have. Who's mumbling? So, let's go to consciousness, because again, this idea that you are a functioning human being making decisions, acting with reason, intending your conduct, it flows out of this notion that you're conscious, that you're aware, right? And so this kind of, some of the general ideas of what consciousness means. Sense of self. You wake up each morning, you don't have to reacquaint yourself with your name, the fact that you love chocolate, or you hate whatever, blah, blah, blah. Your personality remains intact. So that's functioning at some level of consciousness. It also provides for subjective experience and feelings and emotions. Okay, so consciousness, what makes you human? Oh, oops. We have no theory of consciousness. Now, believe me, I know how crazy that sounds. I am bringing you the latest science. I'm not bringing you my opinion. If I express my opinion here today, you'd be even more frightened. I'm just going to give you the science. I'm getting confirmation from the back. There are dozens of competing theories of consciousness. I did a master's thesis on consciousness theory, I want to say 7 years ago. All that data that I wrote is probably out of date already. All sorts of theories, none of which supports the idea that you have free will and that you make conscious decisions. None. There is no scientific theory right now that supports you being a conscious, aware person. Hannah, what do you think about that? Or did you already know this?
Well, I may or may not have already read half of your paper. I've heard this part.
So I have, and anybody who wants this, by the way, I will send it to you. This is a very interesting paper, not a paper, website, 10 crazy theories about human consciousness. And that's just 10 that this author thought's the most provocative and most powerful ones. And when you read through them, you will realize there's nothing, no scientific basis for your everyday notion of life. So this is called the hard problem. In other words, figuring out consciousness has been coined by scientists as, quote, the hard problem. Why? Because no one's figured it out, and the more research we do, the more we realize what we thought was true isn't. So this is the key. How does that blob inside of my skull? You know, if we opened my skull up right now and pulled out my brain, it would just be this very jelly thing. It would have some blood supply, it would have some neurons, there'd be some synaptic connections, there'd be some neurochemicals in there, there'd be some electrical activity. How does that create love? How does that create thought? How does that create poetry, art? This is just a blob of tissue. How is this happening? That's the hard problem. But the problem is that's the core of what we think as being human. Most of you came into this class today, not class, presentation, thinking that brain activity creates thought. And that's what I was taught in college. And that's what we've been taught for a long time. The last 15 years, and especially in the last five years, just get rid of that idea. There appears to be correlation between thought and brain activity, but it does not appear that brain activity creates thought. And oh, by the way, why do you think in English? Brains learn languages? Why do you think in English? Ponder that one for a little while. And then why do people from France think in French? Conditioning. Cultural constructs. Second brain. So here's some speculation now. Now we're going into speculation. We presented you the data. Now there's this thing in your gut called the second brain. It's been called that for a long time, okay? You see an accident or you see something really upsetting on TV and you get it right in your stomach, right? You get a little gut reaction. Or you also have the concept of, gut feeling, intuition, etc. So now we know that neurons line your stomach. Now, ever since we discovered neurons, they've been presumed to be only present in the brain because neurons are associated with thinking. So what are they doing in your stomach?
Telling me to avoid that burrito, I'm guessing?
Well, there's donuts back there if you'd like some.
I walked right past.
You're a lot stronger than I am. I was very upset that they were cut in half. Fight or flight's another example of this, right? So what's going on here? Why would there be neurons in your stomach? Well, we know that the vagus nerve now, and this is very recent information, the vagus nerve is directly linked to your brain and it doesn't go through your nervous system. What? It doesn't go through your nervous system. It's directly linked to the brain. And so 90% of the serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter, is in your digestive tract. And I don't know if you've been reading the popular press, but they're having incredible success curing anxiety and depression. And I'm talking about the real serious stuff that typical drugs don't help. They're curing anxiety and depression by altering the gut biome. Changing your diet and then using probiotic supplements and other techniques that I won't mention here that I mentioned in class last night. probably should not
Also animals.
be on film.
Animal therapy. That's been curing depression and anxiety.
But see, that's going to be working more at the level of mood here. Right here, what we're talking about is, so how does your diet alter your thinking? All right? That's the point I want you to grab here. This is not making a lot of sense. I changed the biome in my gut. I changed the bacteria in my gut, and then somehow it affects my thinking? Really? Maybe I shouldn't have had that donut. Anybody heard of the Heart Math Institute?
Yes.
Okay, so they're out of Denver, a group of scientists. They've probably been going the last 15 years, and they've pretty effectively established that the heart thinks. Now, it doesn't think in English or language, all right? Nor should it. The brain is just a little weenie to just go along with your language like that. The heart's going, no, I'm staying with science. We're not thinking in language. Language is cultural. And so, why would there be 40,000 neurons in the heart? What are they doing there? Well, you don't know, is the short answer. But it doesn't make any sense. In other words, the model that neurons create thought, and that's why they're so heavily concentrated in the brain, doesn't make sense.
I think it's the true brain and heart.
Maybe it is. Is it all three? This is very interesting because we've already talked about how there's a minimum of a 7-second delay on you choosing which hand to move and a minimum 11-second delay on what visualization you do. So then they did some testing on the heart. So you're sitting in front of 2 computer screens. Oh, take that back, 1. And they're going to show you a picture of butterflies, and they're going to measure your heart activity. Right? You're fully wired up. Then they're going to show you a picture of a terrible accident. And they're going to record your heart's reaction to those 2 scenes. Okay, so we know precisely how you respond. Excuse me. Then we randomize the pictures. So you're sitting in front of the screen, you don't know what's coming, whether it's going to be ugly or happy. 7 seconds before the image comes up on the screen, your heart's already reacted in the way that accurately predicts the picture. In other words, 7 seconds before the accident comes up, your heart's already upset. Is it not interesting that there's that correlation between the 7 seconds? This is really interesting data. I hope you agree. Because there's some kind of a survey, right? Okay, I'm just kidding. So, do we make decisions really with all 3? Is there a brain, gut, heart axis? I don't know. Please.
But you're saying that no one knew what the image was going to be for 7 seconds before there was any response from any part of the body.
No, you're sitting in front of the screen, and then your heart starts saying, ugly, accident picture. And then 7 seconds later, that's what picture comes up on the screen. So in other words, your heart knew what picture was coming, even though no one else did. They randomized the pictures.
And they weren't going to attribute it to a delayed thing from the previous picture?
No, because they would have your heart be restored to normal function before the test proceeded. So in other words, we're measuring you at rest, like you would be now. Your heart shouldn't be showing any distress right now, although I hope it is actually. But
so that implies some kind of precognition on the part of the body.
Correct. Now this is peer-reviewed, published data, ladies and gentlemen. This is not some whack job at Yavapai College. I wasn't speaking of me. I meant Curtis. Curtis is our Spanish instructor. He's in the back, and he's hiding right now.
Is that like 100% happened every time?
Yeah. We've gotten to the point now where our equipment's gotten sophisticated enough that we've got typically 100% correlation. If it isn't 100%, it's an outlier. Whoa. Everybody's looking at me with funny faces. Next time we need to film me from the back so we can catch these. So, this is the conventional theory. This is what you showed up today with, right? The notion that, well, your brain creates thoughts. Your brain generates thoughts. Matter generates consciousness. That's what we've been taught for decades, centuries. In fact, there are people who believe this theory so much that they're trying to build a supercomputer that's so powerful that one day it will wake up and say, "Hi, Hal." Remember that movie? What was it? All right.
Yeah.
And so the argument is that it's just simply the fact that our brain is really sophisticated that creates thought. The problem is we have no example in all of nature, in all of science, where matter generates thought. There's no example of that. And by the way, your brain doesn't. So Francis Crick, the co-discoverer of DNA, you've heard of him. Before he passed, he wanted to solve the consciousness issue. And he concluded, and I believe this was in the 1970s, he concluded that your brain is just well, I'll read you this. I love this quote. "You, your joys and your sorrows, your memories, your ambitions, your sense of personal identity and free will are in fact no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and associated molecules." In other words, you're a blob. And love, poetry, free will, all that stuff is made up. You're just a zombie. He was a bowl of fun. Now, as we're going to see in a minute, he had a research assistant help him reach this conclusion. And I'll have some quotes on what that research assistant is saying today. Francis is turning over in his grave. So this flows out of the primary scientific notion that the world is made up of matter, reality is made up of matter. It's called physicalism. Some people call it materialism. That's the conventional scientific view. Now, Professor Owen Jones is one of the most famous neuroscientists in this whole, and he's also a lawyer. That's 2 strikes against getting into heaven, I think. He argues, well, anybody in here with a science background already believes, and that is in determinism. In other words, the Big Bang initiated all events. Even your decision to come here today was created by that energy created thousands and thousands of years ago. And do we have any scientists in here? I mean, that's not argued about within the physical scientists. Determinism is believed to be true. So that means present events are caused by prior events extending all the way back to the beginning of time and matter. Really? So the physical sciences would seem to say automatically you don't have free will. I mean, that's where they start.
What is quantum physics? That's right.
Oh, you guys are good. We'll be there in just a second. So, Koch, Tonini and Koch published this data. Christoph Koch is the head of the Allen Brain Institute in Seattle. He's considered the leading consciousness theorist in the country. He was the person who helped Francis Crick conclude that the brain is just a blob of electrical and chemical activity. And so he says, and so, when we do a brain scan and you think about something in particular, parts of your brain light up. Well, he argues that that's correlation, but it's not causation. However, correlates are not enough if we are to understand even basic facts. For instance, why the cerebral cortex gives rise to consciousness, but the cerebellum, that's another region of the brain, does not, even though it has more neurons and appears to be just as complicated as the cerebral cortex. So in other words, he's gone in and looked at these regions that we associate with consciousness. And he's concluded that why would thought arise from one part of the brain and not another, even when that other part of the brain is full of neurons and maybe even more structurally sophisticated from a neuroscience standpoint. So in other words, the theory that your brain generates thought doesn't have much support. So we know that there's nowhere else in the universe that matter creates thought. That's only associated with the brain. But then we also have the phenomenon of patients having perception and clear memory of events during surgery, even when their brain activity is flatlined. Now this is really interesting data. I don't know if you've seen any of this. But you're in surgery and so on the screen and you're under anesthesia, or maybe you've had a terrible head injury or accident and you're flatlined. There is no brain activity that we can measure going on. And then hopefully we save that person and they wake up and they say, they're able to, and this is common. Now this is not an outlier. This is common in the medical literature. They wake up and they're able to tell you what the doctors were saying when they were trying to save you at the time that your brain was flatlined. There are also, a lot of times, those of you who had surgery, maybe been in a situation where there was a screen put up so you couldn't see anything that was happened, even then the screen's up even when they're putting you under anesthesia. And so then these people would be able to recount what happened on the other side of that screen, even though they couldn't see it physically. Right?
Out of body.
Right? So near-death experiences, I mean, there's a whole host of examples of where we have perception without brain activity. Now, I'm going to tell you something that should make you laugh. Right now, there are some hospitals that are trying to study near-death experiences because they are fascinating. People will die, sometimes for hours, flatlined, heart not beating, no brain activity for hours. And they're able to, they either come back to life or they're somehow resuscitated. And they have full memory of everything that's happened over those few hours. Now, one of the classic things about a near-death, anybody in here have a near-death experience who wants to admit to it? What the classic example is you go up into a corner of the room. So some part of your body leaves, and you go up in the corner in that room, and that's why you're able to see and hear everything. There are hospitals in the nation today, ladies and gentlemen, that have physical screens in the corners so that when your soul goes up in that corner, you still can't see. I'm not making this up. They're trying to figure out what's going on. Isn't that fascinating? So the next time you go into surgery, look and see if they think you're a nutcase and that they have screens up in the corner. All right, so things are not what they seem. That's the takeaway, right? Where is time? Oh my goodness, it's flying. To say that human behavior is determined is to claim it's completely caused by previous events in the brain. But that means that any decision I make is not free. That is a great book. It's called My Brain Made Me Do It. And it's not so difficult that normal people can't read it and enjoy it. So we have all kinds of theories of consciousness now, ranging from we have none to it's a social or a mental construct, or it's caused by quantum events within the microtubules within the brain. That's actually a theory out of the University of Arizona, and it's getting some traction. But the most important one that's floating around right now in the scientific world is we're never going to figure it out. In other words, it becomes so frustrated because the conventional understanding of science is completely contradicted by what we know about consciousness and free will now and brain states. And so rather than saying, let's figure this out, let's get rid of our existing notions of reality, instead they're saying, why bother? We're never going to figure it out. That's not science. So here's a fascinating book called The Idea of the World. The existence of the material world outside and independent of mind is a theoretical inference arising from interpretation of sense perceptions. Ladies and gentlemen, what you see, taste, and feel is photons or information entering your eyes or entering your nervous system and then being processed by your brain. There is no out there that we can confirm is real.
Right, we're all having a different experience at the same time in the same experience.
Of the same thing? Yeah, please.
I once watched a documentary about perception, and there's this man that he had a cornea transplant, and he doesn't remember, he never had any memory of seeing anything. I think he lost his sight when he was a little kid.
Okay.
Infant, I guess, and his perception of the world was so different than us that, we grew up seeing.
Interesting. Yeah.
So, perception is not, like you said, it's real for, what's real for you might not be real for someone else.
Great example. I've not heard of that in the context of an eye, but in the context of heart transplants, it's very common. heart transplants, the recipient often has a change in personality that matches the donor. Yeah. A lot of research on that. It's fascinating. Total change in personality after you come out of the surgery. That's those neurons in that heart, right?
Yep.
Maybe.
Hopefully it's-
All right, so here's my buddy Christoph. With Crick, they concluded that, matter generates consciousness. Here's what he says now. The entire cosmos is suffused with sentient consciousness. We are surrounded and immersed in consciousness. It's in the air we breathe. Really? The soil we tread on. The bacteria that colonize our intestines. And the brain that enables us to think. The latest theory of consciousness, ladies and gentlemen, is Panpsychism. That is, that ultimate reality is mind. That's coming from Christoph Koch and a whole bunch of other researchers. Double-blinded, peer-reviewed research from major universities, not your local psychic. All right? No way. No way. I think I get copyright on this. Did you catch it?
Thank you.
Max Planck, the founder of quantum theory, says, I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness, not the other way around. In other words, brains don't create consciousness. Consciousness creates brains, creates thought. We cannot get behind consciousness. Everything we talk about, everything we regard as existing, postulates consciousness. So right now, that theory goes by the name of Panpsychism, and it is the prevailing best theory. So, I'm sorry, free will doesn't exist. Not only does your brain not act the way we think it should, the way we imagine that it does or assume it does each day, we also don't even have a theory of where your personality comes from. We have no theory of how and where you get your consciousness from. Look at the title of that. Think your conscious brain directs your actions, question mark? Think again. Again, peer-reviewed published data. So now let's go to quantum physics real quick, and I'm running out of time. You guys need to quit asking so many questions. I'm just kidding, you're doing great. Quantum physics obviously deals with the subatomic world, right? So protons, electrons, photons, even quarks, even things smaller. We're finding some of these things out like crazy. But the classical physical model, and the model that you and I all function in during the day and in our everyday lives, is the three-dimensional world, the macro world. Now the problem is they don't agree. Now this is not a talk on quantum physics, so we can't go down that rabbit hole right now. But these two theories disagree. And that makes no sense. And we can't figure it out. I'm going to skip over that one. So materialism and determinism, those are the two fundamental concepts of science assumed by all scientists, cannot explain how mind arises from matter, and it destroys all notion of the self and free will. It's a deterministic universe. Panpsychism, quantum theories restore a self, but then those theories tend to lead to concepts of spirituality, God, intelligent design, etc., and scientists don't allow themselves to go down those paths.
That's the hitch.
That's the hitch. And so we're stuck right now. Take a deep breath. The doctrine that the world is made up of objects whose existence is independent of human consciousness turns out to be in conflict with quantum mechanics and with facts established by experiment. Again, we can't go down the rabbit hole of quantum physics here, but suffice it to say that the observer alters what is observed. So in the scientific world, they say, oh, I only believe what I see. I only believe what we can measure. Well, we've established for sure, this is not in conflict. Before he died, Stephen Hawking said, quantum physics is the most successful scientific theory ever in history. Because every crazy idea it's postulated for the last 100 years has been proven true. Wacko things like things can be in two places at once. Proven. 2012 Nobel Prize in physics. Every particle is entangled, regardless of distance. Proven. Anything that you attempt to measure or observe is altered by the act of observation. Proven. Uh-oh. And so here it says, all this destroys the concept of the world as sitting out there. It's in fact a participatory universe. So here's the new reality. Random, uncertain, indeterminate, created by observation, non-local, at least two places at once, entangled. And by the way, entanglement's faster than the speed of light. Einstein became famous arguing that nothing could be faster than the speed of light. Entanglement happens instantaneously. We have no ability to measure the gap. And we go down to micro seconds. And the new reality is infused with consciousness, and it appears to be a function of mind. So, really cool article here, again, published in Nature magazine. This is the gold standard for scientific articles. You have to be practically a Nobel Prize winning a cat to get into this magazine. This has to be gold standard research. And look at the quote, the universe is entirely mental. There have been serious theoretical attempts to preserve the material world, oops, but they produce no new physics, and they serve only to preserve an illusion. Yep. Don't you love that word illusion coming up?
We're living in a living hologram.
A living hologram.
We're making it up every second.
So a lot of people will argue, well, come on, there's a subatomic world in this world I live in. That subatomic world's of no interest to me. I don't care that particles can be in two places at once and that are altered by observation and blah, blah, blah. But here's the problem with that. If quantum theory denies the physical reality of atoms, and it does, it would also seem to deny the physical reality of chairs, which are made of atoms. In other words, this artificial divide between the micro and the macro doesn't work. Serious people are now arguing that we are participants in a video game. And I don't know about you, but I like to win every game I play. This is a cool book. Not very well written, but the ideas are provocative. The simulation hypothesis. It's only been out a year or two, I think. Elon Musk, the guy from Tesla, he's on record as saying it's 1 billion to 1 that we are in a simulation. 1 billion to 1. Often I will have some quotes from NASA scientists that say the same things, but for time. Ooh, remember the Matrix? Go back and watch. Aren't they coming out with a new one? Yeah. Ooh. So we got a lot of controversial, like even Eastern religions have been saying this for a long time. Any proponents of A Course in Miracles in here? Not very many. Stephen Hawking, before he died, argued that we have 11 dimensions. You and I function in 3.
Actually, there's 13.
Actually, there's 12. But he thought there was 11. We're smarter than he is.
Yeah.
But what do you do with multidimensionality? What do you do with the notion that right next to us right now might be another 8 dimensions that we can neither see, nor participate in, nor measure? Now, the particular theory that Hawking liked is a form of string theory called M theory. And he says that's the best argument we have right now to explain all this crazy data, is that we can only function in 3 dimensions. And by the way, we can only see a little bit over 2% of the light spectrum in this 3-dimensional thing. So there's all kinds of stuff right now. 98% of the light in this reality I can't see, nor can you. That may explain paranormal, may explain ghosts, may explain psychic behavior, etc. It may explain the notion that people can go into those other regions and get data. Obviously not confirmed. But when you have one of the leading scientists in the world arguing that we live in 11 dimensions, something's up. So from a legal standpoint, punishment has to go bye-bye. In other words, the notion that you did this on purpose, and therefore we're going to beat you with a stick, that needs to go bye-bye. And so that's what a lot of legal reformers are arguing right now. We can't prove your intention, and therefore we still can't have you on the street. Pardon me, let me grab a drink. We still can't leave you on the street because you're dangerous, but we're not going to punish you for something that you may or may not have decided upon.
Doesn't that also throw out rehabilitation?
Maybe, although we have a lot of evidence in other countries that rehabilitation works. So it's a concept of what's called plasticity, brain plasticity. So the brain can be easily altered. But that seems to be a conundrum in terms of what we've just said here, correct? Yeah, yeah. So the issue is, if you're not fully in control of your brain, and yet we can help you get control of that brain and function differently. What model is that? Is that social or mental construct again? Please.
How does this affect the insanity defense, which is, my understanding is that it's based on the defendant knowing right from wrong?
Right, yeah. It's the insanity, the concept of insanity in the law is a joke. I mean, you need to be sitting in the corner, you know, mumbling to yourself and putting bubble gum in your eye in order to be adjudicated insane in this state. But to have a court find that you're insane is almost impossible. Our law is very screwed up. But that's a great comment, right? Because we've argued that if you're not mentally capable of understanding right and wrong, we shouldn't punish you, right? We still take you off the street, but we don't punish. So make that distinction between incarceration and punishment. Norway, for instance. I have my Norway ancestral student in the back. Norway, for instance, they've gotten rid of all concept of punishment. They believe that your loss of liberty is punishment enough. Yeah. And so in their prisons, you're in regular clothes. You cook your own food. You have an apartment. You actually have a bathroom that has a door that closes. You're able to go home, see your family on the weekends, even murderers. How do you think that's worked?
Probably very successfully.
Yeah, so our recidivism rate averages over 75%, theirs is 20%. And one of the biggest problems in Norway right now after they moved to this model, because the whole function of incarceration is rehabilitation. Germany, for instance, prison guards are required to have a degree in social work. So every interaction that a criminal has is someone trained in handling anger management, trained in handling someone to help see things differently. Right? They're professionals in mental health. And so the way it's worked out, I mean, Norway's biggest problem in the criminal justice system right now is they have empty prisons. I'm not making this up. They don't know what to do with them. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
So, again, in my class in neuroscience and the law, I focus on the legal implications of this data. But you should leave here thinking to yourself, what kind of implications does this data have for me in my everyday life?
Kindness.
Here's some resources. All of these things are things that I think are accessible to normal people, except maybe the first one. But The Brain by David Eagleman. He's done PBS specials. That's a very interesting story where he argues that we really, don't have free will. Behave by Robert Sapolsky, that's his latest book. Really a brilliant book, not only about the brain, but about human behavior in general, genetics, etc. My Brain Made Me Do It. Anatomy of Violence here by Adrian Raine, that's the text that we use in the neuroscience and the law class. He's one of the first neuroscientists that started brain scanning criminal brains. Here's some others. Dean Radin is a really interesting scientist. That's a goofy title, Real Magic. But this is a whole book on entanglement. Bill Tiller, don't try to read that, Conscious Acts of Creation. He's a Stanford emeritus. He recently passed. But he was professor emeritus from Stanford, and he published a lot of data how they took water and then brought in psychics and meditators and put them in the room with the water, put it in a sealed room, and gave them a half hour or an hour, and they were able to alter the physical chemistry of the water, just with their minds.
What was the guy from?
The guy from Japan, Emoto. Moto did some of the same work. Now, if you are interested in quantum physics and you think this is kind of fascinating stuff, here's a great book, Quantum Enigma, Physics Encounters Consciousness. These two are from University of California, I think Santa Barbara. And they have a class every year on quantum physics for non-scientists. And they usually have about 500 people sign up for it. So they decided to write a book that normal people could read about quantum physics. Any more questions? I do respond to emails, not so good on phone, but very good on emails. So if you call me and I don't call you back, don't be disheartened. Please.
Is there any chance that we could get copies of all the slides that you...
Yeah, I charge $3,000 for this,
Stop.
and I take a check. No, of course. Just here at the end, go ahead and write your email down, or write me at michael.davis@yc.edu, and I'm happy to share this. This is kind of a a very quick summary, obviously, of what we do for a whole semester. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate you coming.
Thank you.